We have a problem, Batman. Gotham needs you again.
Ghostface is not a person. It's a virus that spreads through the human need for attention and the dark comfort of anonymous violence. The mask creates a psychological shield that allows ordinary people to commit extraordinary evil by removing personal accountability and identity. Each killer who puts on that costume believes they're continuing a legacy, but they're really just feeding an addiction to power that comes from terrorizing others. The contingency protocol must account for the fact that Ghostface is not one individual, but a recurring infection that jumps from host to host, each new carrier adding their own twisted interpretation to the original pattern. The mask itself becomes the weapon, not just for hiding identity, but for transforming personality, allowing repressed rage and fantasies of control to emerge without consequence. Stopping one Ghostface is meaningless if the mythology continues to inspire new killers. The real target isn't the person behind the mask, but the symbol itself and the psychological needs it fulfills. The communication pattern represents both weakness and strength in their operational methodology. Ghostface killers are compulsive, about making contact with their victims before striking, using phone calls to create psychological terror and assert dominance over their targets. This need for interaction reveals deep insecurity and desperate hunger for recognition that can be exploited. The voice modulator creates artificial confidence, allowing timid personalities to project menace they don't naturally possess. Trace the calls, monitor the timing patterns, analyze the language choices. Every conversation provides intelligence about the killer's true personality, education level, and emotional state. The weakness lies in their inability to resist this contact phase. They need the fear they create, crave the power dynamic the calls establish, use this compulsion against them by controlling the conversation, feeding them false information, and most importantly, tracking their location through extended dialogue. Their greatest strength, the psychological intimidation, becomes their greatest vulnerability when turned into a tracking mechanism. Physical capabilities are entirely human level, making direct confrontation straightforward once the killer is identified and located. The costume provides no protection beyond concealment. The knife is a basic weapon with limited range, and their fighting skills are typically amateur level at best. Most Ghostface killers rely on surprise, stealth, and psychological advantage, rather than superior combat ability. Remove these advantages, and they become ordinary people, with knives dangerous to civilians, but manageable for anyone with proper training and equipment. The tactical approach involves eliminating their ability to hide, controlling the environment to prevent ambush opportunities, and engaging them in direct confrontation where their lack of real combat experience becomes apparent. Body armor negates their primary weapon. Night vision eliminates their preferred operating conditions, and superior mobility allows for engagement on favorable terms. The physical threat is minimal compared to the psychological impact they create through careful victim selection and dramatic presentation. Victim selection patterns reveal the underlying psychology, driving each individual killer, and provide predictive intelligence for preventing future attacks. Ghostface killers don't choose random targets. They select victims who represent something specific to their personal psychology, often connected to perceived slights, romantic obsessions, or social hierarchies they feel excluded from. The pattern analysis requires examining the killer's personal history, social connections, and psychological triggers to identify potential future victims before attacks occur. High school social dynamics, college relationships, family connections, workplace interactions. These environments provide the context for target selection. The methodology involves mapping the killer's social network, identifying individuals who fit their victim profile, and establishing protective surveillance for higher-risk targets. Understanding why they choose specific victims allows for prediction of who they'll target next, transforming their carefully planned surprises into expected moves that can be countered. Identity concealment creates both operational security and psychological dependence that can be systematically dismantled. The mask serves multiple functions: hiding identity, creating fear through iconic imagery, and most importantly, allowing the killer to separate their actions from their normal personality. This compartmentalization is essential to their ability to function. Remove it, and they lose the psychological protection that enables their violence. The strategy involves forced identity exposure through surveillance technology, voice analysis that can identify speakers despite modulators, and behavioral pattern recognition that connects the masked killer to their civilian identity. Modern facial recognition, gait analysis, and biometric tracking make complete anonymity nearly impossible for extended periods. Once their identity is compromised, their operational effectiveness collapses. They can't return to normal life knowing they're being watched, can't operate freely when their movements are tracked, can't maintain the psychological separation between their killer persona and civilian identity that makes their actions possible. Social media and digital footprints provide unprecedented access to the psychological profile and operational planning of potential Ghostface killers. The modern need to document and share experiences means most killers leave extensive digital evidence of their evolving mindset, target selection process, and planned methodology. Monitor online activity for specific behavioral markers. Obsession with previous Ghostface attacks, research into victim selection methods, acquisition of costume components, practice with voice modulation technology. The digital surveillance extends beyond direct searches to include social network analysis, communication pattern monitoring, and psychological profile building based on online behavior. Forums dedicated to horror movies, true crime discussions, and social media posts about feeling excluded or rejected. These create a profile of individuals at risk for adopting the Ghostface methodology. Early intervention becomes possible when digital surveillance identifies someone moving from passive interest to active planning. What do you think, Alfred?
Master Bruce, you're approaching Ghostface as if it was simply another criminal to be caught. But you're missing the deeper tragedy. These aren't career criminals or hardened killers. They're often young people who've been failed by their communities, their families, and their own ability to cope with rejection and powerlessness. The mask doesn't create monsters. It reveals the monsters that society has already created through indifference, bullying, and neglect. Yes, they must be stopped, but perhaps the more important question is how we prevent the next person from picking up that mask in the first place. Your contingency planning focuses on capture and control, but the real battle is against the social conditions that make ordinary people believe that violence is their only path to significance. Sometimes, the most strategic intervention happens long before the first phone call is made.
Alfred's perspective shifts the entire framework from reactive to preventive strategy. The contingency protocols must include early warning systems that identify at-risk individuals before they commit to violence, intervention programs that address the underlying psychological needs the Ghostface identity fulfills, and community-based approaches that reduce the social isolation and powerlessness that drive people toward masked anonymity. This requires collaboration with schools, mental health professionals, and social services to identify individuals showing warning signs. Social withdrawal combined with violent fantasy, obsession with previous attacks, acquisition of costume components, or practice with intimidation techniques. The intervention approach provides alternative paths for recognition and empowerment that don't involve terrorizing others. Most importantly, it requires dismantling the mythology that makes Ghostface appealing, showing that behind every mask is not a powerful figure, but a broken person using violence to mask their own weakness and fear. The real victory isn't just stopping individual killers, but breaking the cycle that creates them. Technological countermeasures focus on eliminating the operational advantages that make Ghostface methodology effective: anonymity, surprise, and communication control. Modern surveillance systems can track movement patterns even when facial features are concealed. Voice analysis can identify speakers despite electronic modification, and communication monitoring can trace calls in real time, regardless of attempts at concealment. The strategic deployment involves creating comprehensive surveillance networks in high-risk areas, establishing rapid response protocols for threatening communications, and developing technology specifically designed to counter Ghostface operational methods. This includes advanced voice recognition that penetrates modulation, movement tracking that identifies individuals by gait and posture rather than facial features, and communication systems that allow potential victims to immediately alert authorities, while maintaining apparent compliance with killer demands. The goal is transforming their strengths into weaknesses. Their need for communication becomes a tracking opportunity. Their reliance on concealment becomes ineffective against modern surveillance. Their surprise attacks become expected and countered. Psychological manipulation exploits the fundamental insecurity and need for attention that drives individuals to adopt the Ghostface identity. These killers are performing for an audience, seeking recognition and power they can't achieve through normal means. The strategy involves controlling their narrative, denying them the fear and attention they crave, and forcing them to confront their own inadequacy without the mask's protection. This includes media management that refuses to sensationalize their actions, communication strategies that treat them as pathetic rather than frightening, and direct psychological pressure that exposes their weakness rather than acknowledging their perceived power. When their phone calls are met with boredom rather than terror, when their threats are dismissed rather than feared, when their identity becomes a source of mockery rather than dread, their psychological foundation crumbles. The mask only works if others treat it with the respect and fear it demands. Remove that reaction, and the power dynamic collapses, leaving them exposed as ordinary people playing dress-up with deadly consequences. The final assessment acknowledges that Ghostface represents a unique type of threat, not a master criminal or superpowered entity, but a contagious idea that spreads through the vulnerable and disconnected members of society. The contingency protocols exist not just to stop individual killers, but to prevent the mythology from inspiring new ones, to break the cycle of violence that feeds on itself through media attention and social failure. Each successful intervention sends a message that the mask provides no real power, that the identity offers no genuine strength, that choosing violence over seeking help leads only to capture and consequences. The strategy requires patience, resources, and commitment to addressing root causes rather than just symptoms. Because in the end, defeating Ghostface isn't about superior tactics or advanced technology. It's about proving that ordinary people have better options than extraordinary evil, that attention and significance can be achieved without terror and death, that the mask, which promises power, delivers only isolation and destruction. When the last person realizes that Ghostface offers nothing but an elaborate form of suicide that takes others along for the ride, the contingency will have achieved its ultimate objective, not just stopping killers, but stopping the creation of killers altogether.